My friends, Wagner is kicking France out from Africa. They did so in the Central African Republic in 2018, then in Mali, then in Burkina Faso, which both booted their French garrisons. And now we're facing the same situation in Niger. And spoilers, the little birds are saying that the next target is Chad, home of about 1,000 French military personnel. And question is, who's behind all that? Essentially, on July 26, Niger's president Mohamed Bazoum was deposed by his presidential guard, and they have now taken him hostage. General Chiani was named head of the transitional government after the coup. When is he gonna step down? Don't know. Supporters of the coup rioted, looted, and burned luxury stores in Paris. Oops! I mean, the French embassy in Niamey, the capital of Niger. The world was shocked when they saw protesters celebrating the coup and brandishing Russian flags and chanting, "Long live Russia." At the same time, others had slogans like, "Thank you, Wagner." In response to these events, the head of the Wagner PMC, Yevgeny Prigozhin, said the colonialists supported their slave system, filling the African countries with bandits and terrorists. Truth is, over the past few years, Wagner has gained an impressive footprint in Africa, from operations in Libya, Sudan, the Central African Republic, Mozambique, and the latest in 2021, Mali. And most likely, Niger very soon. You won't see this much in the info space, but there have also been lots of demonstrations in favor of President Bazoum, with crowds chanting for democracy, who then got fired at by the men of the presidential guard. Here you can see members of the Nigerian diaspora in a demonstration in Côte d'Ivoire in support of the president. To be honest, coups are nothing new for Niger. They're better at it than they're at football. They went through a coup in 1974, then a failed attempt in 1996, another coup 3 years later in 1999, another failed coup in 2010, then the presidential guard stopped a coup attempt in March 2020. But this year, the presidential guard finally turned on the new civilian government. The gossip goes that apparently President Bazoum was about to fire General Chiani from his post at the presidential guard. And the underlying reasons behind this coup might be partly because of ethnic reasons. General Chiani is of the Hausa tribe, which represents 55% of the population of Niger. And the number 2 of the military junta is from the Zarma tribe, which represents roughly 21% of the population. Together they form a bloc of 75%, and some people suggest that these generals didn't like the fact that the new president Bazoum was an ethnic Arab, as they only represent 0.4% of the country's population. And it's also possible that they thought that majority ethnic groups like Hausas and Zarmas did not believe an Arab deserved to lead them. And what's troubling is that one French analyst called Bernard Lugan predicted all this 4 months ago.
Dont vous venez de parler avec la situation au Sahel et la manière dont nous nous sommes fait jeter comme des malotrus de cette région du Sahel, alors que nous avions été accueillis en sauveurs il y a une dizaine d'années, au moment du début de l'affaire Serval.
Mais est-ce qu'aujourd'hui, effectivement, on est en voie de se faire éliminer ou en tout cas jeter,
le prochain coup, c'est le Niger. L'erreur absolue que nous venons de faire, c'est de rapatrier tous nos moyens qui étaient sur le Mali et sur le Burkina Faso au Niger. Parce que le Niger est dans la même configuration que les autres pays.
Now, some unconfirmed reports mentioned that a few hours before the coup, French intelligence services were ready to position members of the special forces in the presidential palace, but Macron refused, as he feared that this would be interpreted as colonialism. From a geopolitical perspective, France is going through major strategic changes in its African policy. On June 5th, Le Monde wrote, France will further reduce its military presence in Africa, with a decrease of the contingents in Senegal, Côte d'Ivoire, and Gabon, and the redeployment of the French troops in Mali and Burkina Faso towards Chad and Niger, from where they're also most likely going to get the boot if they don't react. This is the result of the complete failure of French policymakers in Africa. The military takeover in Niger now increases the possibility of a major war breaking out in what we call the Sahel region. The ECOWAS, or the Economic Community of West African Countries, or CEDEAO in French, threatened to authorize the use of force if the coup leaders do not reinstate elected President Mohamed Bazoum within a week from last Sunday. And it's not an empty threat. For example, in January 2017, 8,000 troops from ECOWAS entered Gambia to take down the incumbent president who refused to step down after losing the election. And on August 3rd, Senegal confirmed that they would be ready to send troops to Niger if the other countries go in, claiming that this military coup was the drop that spilled the glass. As of now, Nigeria is in, Côte d'Ivoire is in, and Benin has followed their lead. And the president of Liberia has a point. He said, as long as ECOWAS tolerates institutional coups that allow lifetime presidencies, there will always be military coups. Meanwhile, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Guinea support the military putsch. Not only that, they actually doubled down and said that any intervention to restore deposed President Mohamed Bazoum will be considered a declaration of war against all of them. We're facing a World War I type of situation, with alliance forming and everybody anxiously looking at who's gonna light up the fireworks. So at this point, the military leadership in Niger is shaking. Not surprisingly, Niger sent General Salifou Modi on a visit to neighboring Burkina Faso, just to make sure that the alliance is really tight when things start to light up. Not sure if a couple Wagnerians can really have such an impact on the battlefield. But who knows the power of the mighty shovel of Bakhmut? At this point, unless diplomacy prevails, we face a major deadlock situation that can only result in a major war on the African continent. As you might have guessed it, all these countries supporting the coup in Niger all went through their own military takeover in the last 3 years. Mali went through a coup d'etat in 2020, which took down President Keita, who had been in office since 2013, followed by a putsch from the military in May 2021, bringing the leader of the armed forces Assimi Goïta to power. Similar scenario in Guinea, when special forces deposed President Condé in September 2021. And since things are always more fun at 3, the army of Burkina Faso overthrew President Kaboré in January 2022, whose leader was overthrown by another putsch in September 2022, which brought 34-year-old Captain Ibrahim Traoré to power. So you see guys, there's no reason to be depressed in life. This guy went from a captain of the army of Burkina Faso to head of state real fast. And apparently all the girls of Burkina Faso are now going crazy for him. I guess the country is gonna get a new wave of captains coming soon. In each one of these scenarios, democratically elected governments were toppled by the military. And every time, the French army was booted out, to be replaced by Russian troops of the Wagner PMC. Now you can see why ECOWAS governments are on edge, because they could be next. Now all eyes are on Chad, who's quite in the middle in this entire situation, because its leader Mahamat Déby is also somewhat of a putschist, but he also has close ties to the West. His positioning might shift the balance of one side or another. The excuse of these military takeovers in the Sahel is always the same: the failure of the civilian government to bring back security in the never-ending war against jihadists. And they might have a point. In 10 years of fighting, there is no end in sight. As you can see on this map, jihadists are roaming these desertic areas in the north of Mali and Niger, while other jihadist groups are also spreading across this region called the Three Borders area, linking Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. And both are now rapidly expanding their area of control. These wars have taken a heavy toll on African armies. Roughly 2,000 Malian soldiers lost their lives. Meanwhile, the armed forces of Burkina Faso lost 436 KIA from 2015 to 2020, plus an estimated 314 from 2021 to 2023, according to all the news articles I gathered. Just in February of this year, 70 Burkinabe soldiers lost their lives in 2 separate attacks in 4 days. As for Niger, it's hard to say, there's no overall data. From 2013 to 2023, it is estimated that the losses of the Niger security forces to be at least 443 military personnel KIA. And their biggest setback took place quite recently, between December 2019 and January 2020. Within a month, they lost 174 KIA, with the bloodiest day in the military history of Niger to be January 9th, with 89 soldiers fallen on the field of battle. At face value, we're seeing Islamist insurgencies, but actually those are ethnic conflict with a religious hat. And unlike what French elites and the West are claiming, democracy the way it's done in the Sahel region only adds fuel to the existing fire. That's why these countries always end up with military dictatorships. I think what happened in Mali best exemplifies this theme. In 2012, Mali faced an Islamist insurgency, which in fact was an ethnic rebellion of the Tuaregs, who used Islam as a rallying banner to unite all the tribes. The Tuaregs are nomadic ethnic Berbers that primarily inhabit the Sahara Desert. And as you can see on this map, they populate everything north of the Niger River. They only represent 4 million people. That spans across Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, but also the south of Algeria and Libya. They might be not very numerous, but they're very mobile, and they have a long military history in the region. You have to see them like the Vikings of the desert. For centuries, they ruled this place. Like meteors, they would raid these farming settlements in the south, pillage, take captives, and then disappear into the desert. These raids only stopped with the arrival of the French forces in the 1890s. And this would be a known fact that some of the elites would care to open a history book. Even in modern history, since African countries have been independent, they would see that the Tuaregs rebelled from 1962 to 1964, from 1990 to 1995, and again from 2007 to 2009, always against the same governments of Mali and Niger. What they want for 60 years now is an independent state, or at least some form of political representation. However, they never got it. So, 2012, same story. But this time the Tuaregs from the north marched on the capital and defeated the Malian army over and over. The Malian forces essentially melted away and thousands had deserted. Mali then urgently asked France for help, which immediately launched Operation Serval. The Tuaregs were no match for the wrath of the 5,000 French troops present in the region. The jihadists pulled back, dispersed into the desert, and waged guerrilla warfare. This is how French troops were greeted in the streets of Timbuktu as liberators. The situation in Mali was then coupled with another Islamist insurgency, this time from the Fulani people, or Peul in French, also known for their semi-nomadic pastoralist lifestyle just like the Tuaregs. You see, Mali went from 5 million inhabitants in 1960 to 22 million. This massive population boom of these southern farmers led into a massive expansion into Fulani lands for agricultural reasons. And that's how the Fulani people took up arms. And they occupy the region of the 3 borders. And then the fighting spread over all these neighboring countries. So once again, at face value, we might see an Islamist insurgency, which is in fact a deep-rooted ethnic conflict. After the coup of 2021, diplomatic relations between France and Colonel Goïta began to falter. So the military junta of Mali felt that he had no other choice but to seek other partners, like the Russian PMC Wagner. It's not the Russian army, so Russia's not involved. It was estimated that between 300 and 400 musicians were present in the central part of the country. Photos emerged of the Wagner PMC in the town of Ségou from the end of December 2021, where 200 Wagner contractors were reportedly deployed. This time, the noticeable difference is Russia's growing influence in the region and their open support for the putschists, going as far as to say that Russia is there to decolonize Africa from imperialists. I mean, if by decolonization they mean replacing a French military base by a Russian one, then yes. And this represents a huge geopolitical shift, as this region was considered to be France's backyard. In May 2022, Mali broke its defense agreements with France and its European partners. And by August, all 2,400 French troops present in the country had left.
Nous n'avons pas été chassés par les Russes. Les Russes ont profité de notre nullité.
And throughout this discussion, a lot of people like to bring up colonialism or neo-colonialism. But on April 29th, large protests took place in the Malian capital of Bamako for the withdrawal of UN peacekeepers who are for the most part from Africa. Now Burkina Faso, in the middle of the exam, slowly peeked into the paper of its neighbor. Then surprise, surprise, February 2023 marked the official end of the operations of the French troops in Burkina Faso. The Burkinabe army announced the end of the operations of the 400-strong French Sabre force in Burkina Faso and demanded their immediate departure. This is when the teacher looks at the two papers and it's the exact same answers. On May 23rd, newspaper Le Monde wrote, Niger, France's laboratory for its new military approach in Africa. I don't know what their new plan was, but whatever it is, it's already a failure only 2 months after the article was released. How long until Niger demands the departure of the French troops? Now what makes the situation even more complicated is that France is not the only foreign power with a military presence in the country. America, fuck yeah! The US has about 1,100 troops in Niger spread across 3 outposts, with the primary mission of training and supporting the local Nigerian forces, specifically these special operations. Then there's also the topic of Niger's uranium mines that always comes back. Truth is, Nigerian uranium accounts for 10 to 15% of the needs for French nuclear power plants. It's far from crucial for France, as they could easily replace it with uranium ore coming from a friendly country like Canada. But since the growing tensions between the West and Russia, this still becomes a strategic loss. It's important to take out maps. If we take a look where these uranium mines are located, near Arlit, more specifically in Tuareg lands. This is why Niger doesn't want to accept the independence of these Tuaregs, and the country would then lose its biggest cash-making machine. So who's guilty of this mess? Everybody. Now we can assume that the turning point, the beginning of the end of French military presence in Africa, took place in the Central African Republic. Long story short, in late 2012, Central African President François Bozizé sought help from France as the Seleka rebels were approaching the capital Bangui. The Seleka was a coalition of various Muslim ethnic tribes that rebelled against the government. They are demographically a minority as they represent 10% of the population, and once again mostly living in the north of the country in these semi-desertic areas. They were supported by mercenaries from friendly tribes from across the border in Sudan and Chad. Once again, a region that forms some sort of lawless triangle between these 3 countries prone to Islamist insurgencies. So the Seleka forces drove on the capital, massacring many Christian villages along the way, and eventually toppled President Bozizé in March 2013. This is when the deposed president called France for help. And remember, the French were 2 months into their liberation mission of Mali, so they quickly dispatched 1,600 troops as part of Operation Sangaris to bring back peace. You, my viewers, that took part in counter-insurgency operations will understand. A military force can complete a task that it was set to accomplish. But if the goal of the mission is pointless, in the end, you achieved nothing. You know, the French army feared to be perceived like some sort of neo-colonial power, so they completely changed the rules of engagement. The French army simply positioned itself between the 2 groups like a police force, but this legitimized the gains of the Seleka rebels, thus angering the government and the Christian majority of the country, who were now forming their own militias to take care of the problem. And in the end, it was a huge mess, and the French soldiers did not understand why everybody was hating them. One day they got fired at by the Seleka rebels, and another day by Christian militias.
Les Français sont faibles car ils ne veulent pas nous affronter. Et nous avons distribué des couches culottes et des boîtes de lait concentré. Bon, donc on s'est fait jeter.
In 2016, after the political transition was achieved, and a new president was elected, the 2,500 strong French contingent left the country, saying that democracy is back and that their mission was accomplished. However, the Central African government's problem with the Seleka rebels was not solved. Since they represent 10% of the population, they would continuously lose election after election, and their only way to be heard would be through armed uprisings. In the end, the fighting never really stopped, and with the French withdrawal, the new president, Touadéra, faced the immediate challenge of maintaining security in major cities. This is when Wagner stepped in to fill a security vacuum left by France. However, the Russians didn't make the same mistakes as the French. First of all, their deal with the Central African government was extremely simple: military support for the government and training of the armed forces in exchange for the rights to exploit the country's very lucrative mines. They were not there for some sort of very ambiguous humanitarian police peacekeeping mission for democracy. No, they fully sided with the government. And by May 2018, 1,400 musicians went on to track Seleka rebels wherever they went. And I say that they were not bound by humanitarian rights.
Et nous sommes fait jeter de Centrafrique, d'abord par Sarkozy, qui avait décidé d'éliminer les bases françaises en Afrique et qui a décidé de faire évacuer Birao. Birao, c'est la clé de l'Afrique centrale et c'est la protection sud du Tchad. Et tous les coloniaux, qui tient Birao, tient l'Afrique centrale.
Essentially, the French left the base of Birao in 2007. As you can see, this city controls the entire border area with Chad and Sudan. If the French had stayed in that military base, there would have been no Seleka insurgency in the first place. So when the Wagnerians arrived, they immediately took control of Birao, which essentially cut off the Seleka rebels from their rear operating bases in Chad and Sudan. It's so simple, and it worked. Fun fact, Wagner released a movie about their experience in the Central African Republic. It's called Tourist. But there's one scene at the beginning of the movie, I can't believe they actually released that. So there's the head instructor that warns the new Wagnerians that just arrived in the country that they will have to deal with African recruits that don't know from which end the rifle fires. And while he says this, you see them in the back dancing and chanting. Just imagine the outrage if Hollywood released such a dialogue. Essentially, if you understand what happened in Mali and in the Central African Republic, it's copy-paste from there. Now the next hotspot might be Chad. If this happens, within a couple years only, Russia would have expanded its control over a straight line going from the Atlantic Ocean to the Red Sea. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The links are in the description below.